before it all breaks up. But anyway, well, welcome back. We're doing two things this spring into the summer, and the first of which is what we're starting this morning, which is Jesus's injunction to us, commandment to us, to love our enemies. And we'll be looking at that until I have my schedule in front of me, April 19th. So we'll be doing this for a while, and we'll look at Israel today and the Old Testament and the Jewish tradition, and then Jesus a week from now, and then at various figures through the, oh, it just went out again. Various figures through the Christian tradition. Okay, here we go. I don't know what's going on. Until April 19th. And then we'll start a series that Cordelia and I are collaborating on in preparation for the 250th, the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And I'm putting together a series that I've called The Spirit of Religious and Civic Liberty. And it's really interesting how closely entwined those two ideas are. And religious liberty actually gives rise to the quest for civic liberty. So the quest for religious liberty actually is largely responsible for the country we live in today. It's a very interesting move. So we'll be looking at that and various figures during that time period, interesting sermons, interesting writings, et cetera. So, and that will go through the end of June. And then in early July, Cordelia will bring fireworks in here, and we'll have this whole signing ceremony. So I guess I'll just put this down for now. Can you hear me okay? I'll use my stage voice. So this morning, when I was initially putting this together, I thought, well, we'll start with Matthew 5, love your enemies, et cetera. And then I thought, there's been a lot of mischief created by this passage. And so I think it's worth starting actually with whether or not Jesus is actually talking about, what is Jesus talking about in the opening section of that passage in Matthew about love your enemies? And the passage goes like this. And well, just to rehearse what's going on in the Sermon on the Mount, as you know, there are a series of not antitheses, but you have heard that it was said, but I say to you. And many of them are actually taken from the law of Moses, right? You have heard it said, you shall not murder, but I say to you, if you have basically hatred in your heart, you've committed murder already. Or, and if you call somebody a fool, oh man, I'm in trouble. But anyway, okay, we're not going to talk about that one. But, you shall not commit adultery. That's a very famous one. Jimmy Carter made that very famous. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, one of the most misunderstood passages in Scripture. And then finally, so all of those come from the teaching of Moses, right? Which is the teaching of God. And then he says, you have heard that it was said, you shall love, shall I try it now? Testing, nope. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Okay. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Where is it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemies? Not in Moses, not in the Old Testament, not in the Jewish tradition as we have it today. So that's one of the puzzles, is about whom was Jesus speaking? And where did this teaching come from? But unfortunately, Christians throughout history have used this to claim superiority over their Jewish neighbors and say, well, you teach you should hate your enemies. We teach we should love our enemies, right? And we also paint then the Jews as this hateful people who have been told to hate their enemies, right? Which is really astonishing. This would have to come, by the way, from our own scripture. 80%, roughly 80% of our scripture is Israel's scripture. So if this is what our scriptures are teaching, it's a wonder that we still are reading it, right? So I thought it would be worth looking at what actually is the teaching about enemies in the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament and in the history of Israel, and then how can we understand? And then what's also the understanding of these commandments in the Jewish tradition, especially the rabbinic tradition? And so that's what I thought we'd look at this morning, and then look at some exemplary passages from Genesis and First Samuel about hatred and how destructive hatred is. So if that makes sense, that's what I thought we'd do this morning. So the text Jesus seems to be quoting in Matthew 5. By the way, Luke's version of this commandment does not have an antithesis like you have heard it said. So that's kind of interesting. We'll look at that next week. But what he seems to be referring to is Leviticus 19, which is what's called the holiness code. You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. And Christians think that Jesus thought this commandment up, but he's actually quoting Moses. And the commandment in Leviticus 19 you have right in front of you. And it tells you right away that whoever said you shall hate your enemy wasn't quoting Leviticus, that's for sure. So Leviticus 19, verse 17 says, you shall not hate in your heart any one of your kin. Okay. So that would make it very unlikely that you're commanded to hate your enemy. You shall not have in your heart any hatred toward your kin. You shall reprove your neighbor, or you will incur guilt yourself. So if you see your neighbor sinning, you should point that out to him or her, because otherwise you'll share in their guilt. I think that's a really interesting idea, by the way. Ezekiel says that if the shepherds, who are the prophets, don't warn the people of their sin, they're guilty of that sin and will be punished for that sin. So there's this idea of collective responsibility, which we seem to have lost. So no, still dead. Which we seem to have lost. And it's on now again?
Like you're on.
I'm on. Okay. This is fun. Thank you, David. It was David's magic touch, right? They can affect the sacrament and heal the microphone. But anyway, thank you very much. Because I was going to start losing my voice, I have to say. I may yet. So you shall not hate in your heart any one of your kin. That should already pull the rug out from under, hate your enemy. You shall reprove your neighbor, or you will incur guilt yourself, which is, as I said, a really interesting idea. Reprove, by the way, doesn't mean rebuke or chastise or scold. It simply means pointing out the error that you see being committed out of love, actually. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against any of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. And of course, that last line should be very familiar to us. And I remember when I taught the Eclipse of Israel course, where we read a whole bunch of the Old Testament before we read the New Testament, and the students were shocked that this wasn't Jesus's teaching, that this came from Moses. Because anyway, so you can see several of the ideas. You shall not hate, shall not take vengeance, you shall not bear a grudge. And let me tell you, if you obeyed those commandments, the world would be, and your life would be in much better shape, much, much better shape. So you see all sorts of behavior in churches where people are bearing grudges, and they even want to have vengeance on other people. No, I'm really serious. My wife is a conference minister in the United Church of Christ. She's now responsible for all the UCC churches in Pennsylvania. But don't call her bishop. She's a conference minister, and she could tell you stories about grudges and vengeance. But so that would just be a good place to start for all of us, right? You shall not take vengeance, nor shall you bear a grudge against any of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Now, there's an argument that some have about how extensive this commandment is meant to be. Is it love your neighbor as in anyone, Gentile or Israelite? Or is it love your neighbor as in your fellow Israelite, but not necessarily a Gentile? And there are different schools of thought in the Jewish tradition of interpretation, but the majority one is it's everyone, because the neighbor means the next person, right? It means the person in proximity to you, and that can be anyone. And Jews throughout history were constantly interacting with their neighbors. And so it would be very funny, odd, if it was love your neighbor as in your kin, as in your immediate kin, but hate everyone else, right? It doesn't matter how you treat anyone else. But that is one of the things you'll see disputed, is how widely this commandment goes. I personally think it goes very widely. The other thing that's really interesting is how quickly this issue comes up in Moses' own ministry. As you know, the 10 words, it's better, the Decalogue means 10 words. It's better than the 10 commandments, because it's really, God says 10 words to Israel. And so right after God says the 10 words to Israel, the very next thing that's taught has to do with how you treat your enemy. So it's not an unimportant issue for God in relationship to Israel's behavior. And it's this wonderful passage, the rabbinic scholars look at this a lot, this passage a lot, to try to generate how you should understand your relationship with your enemy. So it comes from Exodus 23. And we'll also look, by the way, at further thought about taking vengeance and bearing a grudge. So just flag those. But I just wanted to get the scripture in front of us first. When you come upon your enemy's ox or donkey going astray, you could say, oh, look, my enemy's ox is going astray. And, as you know, if you have an animal at this time, you're incredibly wealthy. That's your wealth. And so if your ox or other animal is going, or donkey is going astray, that person's going to be impoverished if that animal actually goes away, right? And you could think, oh, look, God is directing my enemy's ox away from him. There's a great poem that my wife pointed out to me when I was still in the professorial grind, that was entitled "The Book of My Enemy Has Been Remaindered." Right? So it's being sold for 50 cents by the publisher. So anyway, so it's that kind of thing, right? So you see your enemy's ox or donkey going astray. You should not be indifferent. You should not celebrate. You should not say, oh, God has delivered me from my enemy. You shall bring it back. You shall bring it back, right? When you see the donkey of one who hates you struggling under its burden, and you would hold back from setting it free, you'd be like, if this were a friend of mine, I'd set it free under this burden, but I'm not going to. This is an enemy of mine. This is somebody who hates me. So I'm just going to reciprocate. I'll hate in return, right? No, you must, not you might, you could, you must help to set it free. You must. You must help the person who is your enemy, who hates you, right? Now, this is something that gets picked up in the Jewish tradition, not so much in the Christian tradition. The Jewish tradition's teaching on relationship to enemies, and it's also true in the Hebrew Bible, is action-oriented. It's not so interested in what you think about your enemy, whether you have warm, fuzzy feelings about the person who hates you, probably not, right? It's about how you would act toward them. And in the later rabbinic tradition, these actions are seen as overcoming and countering the evil impulse that we all have, right? And we also have a good impulse. And so you want to strengthen the good impulse and thwart the evil impulse, right? And there's another commandment in Moses about helping a friend load a donkey. You can imagine this was quite an issue in that society, right? In a highly agrarian society. And the rabbis say, if you see your enemy's donkey struggling, help that donkey first and get to your friend second, because that way you'll overcome the evil impulse, right? So if it's a conflict between your duty toward your friend and your duty toward your enemy, fulfill the duty toward your enemy first, because it goes against our evil inclination. So they're aware of evil inclinations, but the way to counter it is by action, by concretely helping your enemy, right? By leading the enemy's donkey back, by easing the burden of the one who hates you. Notice it doesn't say the one whom you hate, right? Because you shall not hate in your heart, right? We could just put a full stop there. So God forbids us, right, and Israel to hate. So it doesn't say when you come across the animal of the person you hate, right? It says the one who hates you, but you are not supposed to hate anyone. So there is an attitudinal thing, I could say. And also grudging and vengeance would be. But you can see also, I mean, it's really marvelous. It's very, very concrete in terms of your treatment toward enemies. And as I said, in the church, it's very unlikely that people are living up to Matthew 5:45. But hey, starting here would be a great idea, right? Helping your enemies when they're struggling. You see this also in the book of Proverbs. These are very famous passages, but it's worth having them in front of us. Proverbs 24, do not rejoice when your enemies fall. There's another good one, right? That would be if we just did that. Our lives would be different, right? Do not rejoice when your enemies fall, and do not let your heart be glad when they stumble. So don't sit there and get all smug and say, I saw it coming, couldn't happen to a better person. or instant karma, that kind of thing. It's like, no, no, that's all rejoicing. Lest the Lord see it and be displeased and turn away his anger from them. So the Lord may be angry with your enemy. It's entirely likely, actually. And that's not a bad thing in Israel's life, right? The Lord was angry with Pharaoh. That's why the Exodus happened. But the Israelites, by the way, were never commanded to hate the Egyptians that they were enslaved by, who were killing their male children, right? They were never commanded to hate them. So anyway, so when you see, do not rejoice when your enemies fall, do not be glad when they stumble, lest the Lord see it and be displeased and turn away his anger from them. Do not say, and this is really important given the way people think Jesus is talking about Moses, do not say, I will do to others as they have done to me. Do not say that. I will pay them back for what they have done. How many movies, how many television shows, how many novels are about payback, about vengeance, about getting them back, about giving them justice? Oh, yeah, right, justice, right? We want justice. They didn't suffer enough. They didn't pay enough, right? So do not do that. Do not say, I will do to others as they have done to me. Right? Do not. So retaliation, reciprocity, that has nothing to do with Israel's life, right? It really doesn't. I will pay them back for what they have done. We'll see, the last thing we'll look at is David and Saul, and how close David got to paying back Saul for what he had done and then didn't. But anyway, so those are really powerful passages. And then finally, Proverbs 25, which is quoted by Paul. We'll look at that next week. If your enemies are hungry, give them bread to eat. See, it's very concrete. It's like the last thing you'd want to do is say, oh, I see you're hungry, you who hate me, want to destroy me. Here, I will give you bread. And if they are thirsty, give them water to drink. For you will heap coals of fire on their heads, and the Lord will reward you. Okay, now this passage always really bothered me because I thought it's a bank shot of vengeance, right? So by feeding your enemy and giving them water, you're punishing them, right? You're inflicting punishment on them. You're heaping coals on their heads, which, as you can imagine, would be a very unpleasant thing to have done to you. Well, it turns out that there's a practice in Egypt in which a penitent person would show the genuineness of their penitence by heaping coals on their head, very similar to sackcloth and ashes, which is a practice that gets picked up, especially after the Babylonian exile. And so heaping coals on their head means you could lead them to repent. You could lead them no longer to be your enemy, right? And there's this marvelous saying, I'll just jump to it right now. It's right toward, it says, Avot de Rabbi Natan, 23, it's right before the Genesis passage. This is widely quoted in rabbinic literature. This is a rabbi, but it still gets the point. Who then is a hero? One who turns an enemy into a friend, right? Who is a hero? Not one who defeats an enemy and brags about it, but one who turns an enemy into a friend. That's a real art, by the way, to turn an enemy into a friend. And I think that's what heaping coals on the head means. It means it's by doing this, you could possibly convert them. You could bring about a change of heart in your enemy, which would be true, by the way. I mean, if you hate somebody and they feed you, and you hate somebody and they give you water when you're thirsty, it's going to be pretty hard to keep that hatred going. What keeps hatred going, and I have to work on this, went to the Philadelphia Museum of Art, although it's not going to be called that anymore. Apparently, they're changing back. The Art Museum of Philadelphia. I don't know why they. Anyway, we're driving home, and I was being tailgated like crazy, right? Like people right 80 miles an hour right on your bumper, and it's just really hard not to retaliate, right? It's really hard not to make that beloved gesture, right? And then I think, my wife is sitting there and she knows me. She knows the evil principle at work in me. And she just keeps telling me, don't, do not engage and all that. So I just put my blinker on and I pull over nicely and, not too slowly. I don't hit my brake, but it's so hard not to want to retaliate. It's just so hard. And road rage is one of the easiest things to trigger that, isn't it? Which is weird. Like if I'm walking down Duke Street and somebody tailgates me ankle gates me or whatever it would be, trail gates me. I don't know what you'd call it. Well, am I going to like slam on, stop and turn around? No, it just doesn't bother me at all. But put us in a bunch of tons of steel and we become these furious maniacs. I mean, it's real and can be hair triggered. It's really scary, actually. And we think we're doing really well. Our lives are going, and I'm doing contemplative practices and I have my anger under control. This is me. This actually happened to me. And I will use language that you will not want to hear and use anywhere else. But when my wife and I were coming back from church, and I was feeling especially together and grounded and centered and all that stuff, and we got to an intersection and it was a four-way stop, and this pickup truck went through the stop sign after the car in front of it, like so it doubled up on me, and I was like, "Screw you!" And she's like, "Wow, you really are. You're a different person." Julian and Norwich has nothing on you, right? So it's really scary just how quickly this can happen. But yes. Oh, you never do that. No, 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 never, never. You do? I'm so shocked. Yes, Glenn?
All of it with, but Jesus loves
Yeah, but Jesus, and so do I, right? So I have gotten better because my wife sitting in the passenger seat, she's been a very good reinforcer of the good impulse and suppressor of the evil impulse. But these concrete things, like concretely keeping your hands on the steering wheel and just moving over the other lane, looking straight ahead, forgetting about it, saying a mantra, Maranatha, which is my thing. That actually does get you grounded again. But man, just don't brag. Theodore Roethke, one of my favorite poets, has a saying, "It is difficult to say all things are well when the worst is about to arrive. It is fatal to woo yourself, no matter how graceful the posture." So if you're sitting there wooing yourself, saying, "I'm just such a different person now," that's when you're going to get into real trouble. Did I see it? Yes.
A real motif in the afterlife and world religions.
Mm.
It's a pure.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's also
No.
what they're wishing.
I think, yes. So the fire is also a symbol for purification, which is very true, which is why it's unusual in the New Testament for fire, the eternal fire, to be prepared as punishment, because fire is usually purgative, right? It's purifying. So thank you for that. Yeah, I think keeping coals of fire on their head is that. It's a positive transformation. But it sounds, especially when you're younger, you think, you're going to dump a charcoal fire on somebody's head? So yeah, but I think you're right. That's a very important thing. And one of my favorite theologians, Gregory of Nyssa, points out that the fires of hell are actually purgative, and that the souls that enter hell are transformed by that fire so that they can be reunited to God. I think that's a beautiful thought. I hope he's right. Right? So anyway, so you can see already that the odds that you love your neighbor and hate your enemy, where is that coming from? Well, it might have been Jesus's contemporaries who were teaching something like that. That's what Calvin thought, for instance. But you just can't find that in Scripture. In fact, it's always, if you notice, the person hates you. Yeah, when you see the donkey of one who hates you, it never says when you see the donkey of the person you hate, because you're not supposed to have hatred in your heart, right? You're just not supposed to. Then finally, in a passage from Deuteronomy, which also gets picked up very much in rabbinic literature, the Israelites are told about who can potentially join their congregation. And so the word abhor here doesn't mean necessarily just hate, but it also means avoid, like exclude, abhor. I find that to be abhorrent. That behavior is abhorrent, so it means you would avoid them, right? You shall not abhor any of the Edomites. Now, the Edomites are the archetype of the opponents of Israel. The Edomites initially became, in rabbinic thought, became the Christians. The Christians were Edomites, and then the Romans. And so we're Edomites in rabbinic literature, and that's not a compliment, right? But it says, you shall not abhor them, for they are your kin. You shall not, and then that's tough enough, but listen to this one. You shall not abhor any of the Egyptians. The Egyptians who began to enslave you, the Egyptians who began to kill your offspring, the Egyptians who tormented you and sought to kill you at the Sea of Reeds, you shall not abhor the Egyptians because you are an alien residing in their land. You have a relationship with the Egyptians. You should not abhor them. The children of the third generation that are born to them may come into the assembly of the Lord. So it wouldn't be the first generation, but still, it's pretty amazing, actually. So again, the Old Testament is very concerned about grievances and grudges and vengeance, and really and that's, by the way, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth is a way of controlling vengeance, right? We think it's like, oh, we're commanded to retaliate. It's like, no, no, no. Human beings are the only species about which we know that go way over the top in retaliation, right? We don't reciprocate, we way overdo it. So if you touch me, I'm going to punch you. If you punch me, I'm going to hit you in the head with a bat, that kind of thing. So that you can see also in that, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth is don't go over the top. It's very precise reciprocity. But here they're even commanded not to have reciprocity itself, but heap coals of fire on the heads of those who are their enemies. Well, I have a passage that I found too late, but I want to insert it here because it picks up on this theme. And it's from the Rabbi Rashi, who's a medieval French Jewish thinker, lived between 1040 and 1105. So we're jumping ahead sometime, but he's commenting on a verse we looked at the very beginning. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your countrymen. And he wants to know what taking vengeance would mean in everyday life and what bearing a grudge would mean. And again, he's very concrete. That's why I love this passage. So he's commenting on this, thou shalt not avenge. And he says, if one says to another, lend me your sickle, to help harvest. And he replies, no. And the next day, he, the one who said no, says to the former person, lend me your hatchet. And he retorts, I am not going to lend it to you, just as you refuse to lend me your sickle. Then he is avenging. Isn't that interesting? So avenging is, you did this to me, I'm going to do the same thing to you. So avenging is, I will do to others as they have done to me. So it's actually doing it. Okay, so that's avenging. This happens all the time, right? So vengeance and avenging is something we confront in our lives all the time. And you didn't do that for me, I'm not going to do it for you. Yeah, Gay?
Not avenging, but the statement, give to him who asks. Give to the person who asks. Don't go through a repertory in one's head. Is he going to spend on drinking? Is he going to do? Forget it. They ask for help.
Right.
Give it.
Just do it. Right. Yeah. And especially if it's somebody who's at enmity with you. Right. So yeah, or somebody who wronged you. Right. And we see this all the time. Well, they didn't invite us last year for their party. We're not going to invite them this year. Right. Or they didn't send me a Christmas card last year, so I'm not sending. I mean, we do this all the time. Have this little calculation of pluses and minuses, right? Ones and zeros. So that's avenging. So it's actually not giving the person something they ask for, and Gay's right. That's what Jesus is trying to counter by saying, give to one who asks of you. Don't think about it. Don't count. And he doesn't say, because they were nice to you. He just says, give to one who asks of you, right? So avenging is, no, you didn't do it for me, so I'm not going to do it for you. What is bearing a grudge? If one says to another, lend me your hatchet, and he replies, no, and on the next day, the one who said no says to him, lend me your sickle, and the one to whom he said no initially replies, here it is. I am not like you, because you would not lend to me. Now, we know what that's called in our culture, right? Passive aggressive, right? There's this wonderful set of ads on TV, passive progressive. I don't know if you've seen it, but they have all these wonderful examples of this kind of behavior. So that is bearing a grudge, right? It's like, oh yeah, I will lend it to you, even though and I will remind you, you didn't lend it to me when I asked you, right? That's bearing a grudge. So we're not to do either thing. This is called bearing a grudge because he retains enmity in his heart. See, that's what we have to get out. You can't have enmity in your heart. It's absolutely forbidden. Although he does not actually avenge himself. So grudging is better than avenging, because it withholds the action, but it's bad because it leads to avenging. Yes.
Can I ask just one
Yeah,
question?
yeah.
This, I understand a little bit, but you know what the other person wants. And the one that I'm having trouble with is Exodus 23, when you say about dealing with the donkey who is overburdened. And you might be doing something that the person whose donkey it is doesn't want you to do. And so how do you figure out what the right thing to do there is? What is the brotherly thing to do? You know, he might want that donkey to be doing the work that he's doing, and you might see it incorrectly.
Well, okay. So did everyone hear that question? It's a really good question. How do you know that your neighbor would look kindly on you going and helping the donkey?
Kindly, but would accept.
Yeah, what I mean is accept that.
What the right thing to do is. in
Right,
those situations.
right. The answer is, see, the rabbis are really smart. They ask this question: should you help somebody with their donkey if they're not helping the donkey also? The answer is no, because you're enabling them.
Okay.
You don't want
people.
so in the rabbinic view, and I think this would be an Israelite view, you don't just go over and do it for them, you do it with them. Right? So you see it struggling, and your enemy is actually trying to help I think this is excellent. It's actually not stated in the text. It's a great question. And then you could say, we could interpret it that way and say, just do it, right? But the rabbis say, no, you don't enable people, because that's really bad behavior, right? And so this will encourage your neighbor, your enemy, to just wait around for somebody to help when the donkey's struggling. And so even if they're not able to free the donkey of the burden, they should be trying, right? And if they're trying, then you help them. Yeah.
How do you deal with an alcoholic who doesn't want your help, but he really needs to have your help?
That's a really tricky question. And that's the trick, right? Is you can only really help somebody who wants help. It's absolutely true, right? The problem with our culture, especially our Christian culture, is, and Sam Wells, have any of you heard of Sam Wells? He's this great, he has this posting. Well, actually, you know this posting, right? St. Martin in the Fields now. He was chaplain at Duke University, and a friend of mine was a really good friend of his, and I got to meet him. He gave a talk to the students at the Notre Dame London Center about what he has learned as an expat in America coming back home, because they were kind of one semester expats in London who were going to come back to the States. And I said, so what did you learn in being in America and coming back to England that they might sort of analogically use to when they go back from England to home? And he said, the one thing I learned when I was at Duke is that American Christians love to do things for people. We do things for people. We don't want them to help us. Oh, no, no, no. I'll get that for you. I will do this for you. And that's superior in our mind to doing things with them. So, I mean, you hear people say, well, my sister's an alcoholic. What am I going to do for her? Well, guess what? Nothing. Love her, support her. My sister was an alcoholic. She died of alcohol and diabetes. There was not, I mean, her daughter was distraught with the direction of her life, tried everything she could do for her, with her, all that stuff. But Sam said, it was just brilliant. He said, do things with people. Don't do things for the homeless, do things with them, right? Don't do things for the hungry, do things with them. Because then it also builds community, and then you're not patronizing them. And then you're not enabling them. They're not just sitting around waiting for somebody to do this for them. So it's a brilliant insight, and that's actually the rabbis. The rabbis would say, don't do it for your enemy, do it with your enemy. So it's a really good question. The assumption would be, and it's not said, but the assumption would be your neighbor is indicating that your enemy is indicating that he can't handle the situation, right? He's trying to handle it and can't handle it. And so then, in spite of the fact that it's your enemy, go help him with his donkey, right? And if your friend's having trouble loading his donkey, he can wait. I think that's really, so go with the person who's your enemy and then help your friend, because that way you'll reinforce the good principle and discourage the evil principle. Yeah, Mel.
Only speaking of the alcoholic part of it is that I had a very good friend who was an alcoholic, but sober for 40 years or 20 years. But he became an interventionist. He went out, families when people could not do it themselves, so.
Hmm.
Just to add that in there, that put a better light on it.
Right.
People, there are systems and there is a person that can help you.
No, it's really true. And so then you do it with someone, right? So going back to Sam's
It's a
point.
family.
No, it is. It is. My mom had a sister who was an alcoholic, and she succeeded at one point in getting my sister. She had a sister, my aunt, got her help, right? She got her to the point where she wanted to get help, and she actually was, quit drinking, and then she just couldn't do it and wound up committing suicide. So also be ready for failure, because it's any kind of addiction, and St. James is an amazing place for that issue. So just amazing, and it's a really difficult issue. But my mom couldn't do anything for or with her sister until her sister wanted to do something. But she also made it very clear to her. She was there, loved her, and all that. Whenever my aunt decided she needed help, but it was tragic. I mean, it was really a tragic thing. So anyway, those are great questions. So you can work with the person, right? So that would be the key, is if you're helping your enemy, you're with the enemy helping him with his donkey, not if you're just doing it for him. Because could actually be seen as an aggressive act. You're interfering with somebody else's property. That would not be a good thing. Bringing the donkey back, the assumption is your enemy doesn't know it's gone away. So that's actually that's an obvious one, but that's a really good question about helping with the load. Yeah, Gay.
Reasons I liked working with Episcopal Relief and Development. And this is a plug for them, because they don't just go into a community, in our case it was El Salvador, and just do for them. The organization and the money goes ahead, the local community decides what it is they need to have done. They're responsible for finding the materials with the money that they've been given. They are in control of how it's done. So the person overseeing our handmade road, by the way, was local, and everything was done according to the local ordinance and everything. And it wasn't just charity, and it created community. However briefly we were there, we forged community.
Right.
And one of the things I learned is that one area that we were working in, we never got to because that wasn't in our purview, was so difficult to get to that the only people from outside the community that had come with help were Episcopalians. So the Episcopalians were known as the people who walked.
Oh, wow. I like that.
Episcopal Relief and Development took by hand whatever was needed for that village to do whatever product they needed to have help with. And I'm not saying it's always like that, but it really taught me a lesson about forging community.
Oh, yeah.
Among people who you may not even speak their language, but the relationship they formed with us was really long.
And so you could,
It was just different from just coming in, swooping in, doing whatever you're gonna do and then leaving.
right. And those are people you care about, right? And who care about you. Imagine if you do that for somebody who hates you and who's your enemy. And what you're doing, it's beautiful. Thank you for that. All these actions that it's being spoken of here are community building, community restoring. What you're trying to do is by acting in a loving way toward your enemy, which is really what's going on here, you're restoring community, right? You're bringing them back into the community. So that's really beautiful, though. The people who walk, I like that a lot. So yeah, very, very beautiful. Yeah, thank you.
Personal relationships. One of the questions that's important to ask is, what do you need? Instead of, I have a tendency to want to go in and fix things when I see people needing something. And I think it goes back to Ted's question. Are you really knowing what they need? And to have somebody ask you, what do you need? It's like, and then sometimes I've been asked that and I thought, I don't really know.
No, that's true. It's a really good point.
How can I serve?
And yes, that's a beautiful statement. And remembering, this is the attitude we're to take with regard to that question is towards somebody who hates you, right? What do you need? You who hate me, what do you need? Well, you're thirsty, I will give you water. You're hungry, I'll give you bread. So, it's easy for us to think about it in terms of doing things with people who are going to be very appreciative. But what if it's somebody who's still going to hate you when you're done? You do it anyway. It doesn't say, I mean, it's heaping coals on their head. Doesn't mean that's going to work either. So it's not a manipulation. It's got to just be a concrete action. Just to get one more, the great Jewish teacher Maimonides has this wonderful quote on the same theme. He's commenting on the same verse about taking vengeance and bearing a grudge. And he says, you shall blot any offenses against you out of your mind. So just get them out and not bear a grudge. And then I love this line, for as long as one nurses a grievance and keeps it in mind. Have you ever met somebody who just rehearses their grievances over and over again? Hi, Ted, how are you doing? Well, did I tell you I have the worst boss in the world? And so nursing a grievance. I heard a sermon by William Sloane Coffin once, and I can't remember the passage of scripture it was on, but he said, everybody has their own garden of grievances. And we want to make sure that they're green and flourishing and bearing fruit. And we go in there and we tend to them and we put a fence around it because those grievances, we cherish them, right? This gives us leverage. We have these grievances. So do not bear a grudge, for as long as one nurses a grievance and keeps it in mind, one may come to take vengeance. So if you nurse these grievances and grudges, you will be leading yourself on the road that leads to vengeance. The Torah, therefore, emphatically warns us not to bear a grudge. Now, notice it doesn't say the Torah does not emphatically urge us to love our enemies. I'm not saying that. It doesn't teach us that. Jews think that's wrong. You can't love your enemy, and it'll be self-destructive if you try. But do these concrete things, starting with don't bear a grudge, forget the evil that was done against you, don't go on the highway toward vengeance. So the Torah emphatically warns us not to bear a grudge, so that the impression of wrong should be completely obliterated. Just forget it and no longer remembered. This is the right principle. It alone makes civilized life and social interaction possible. As long as we bear grudges, as long as we rehearse the wrongs that were done to us, civilized life is impossible, right? It is, right? And it also just has a horribly toxic effect on me. If I just sit there grinding the same mill, right, over and over again. So it's a very, very powerful tradition. So you can see on the one hand, Moses and the Jewish tradition and our own scripture, and then the Jewish tradition, especially rabbinic, does not teach love your enemy. And nowhere in there. But it certainly doesn't teach hate your enemy. You're not to have hatred in your heart, right? Yes.
Yeah. Put into just common sense, healthy boundaries. Because there are times when you do need to remove yourself from someone who might be bullying you or maybe pigs you in a negative way all the time. Good person, but for some reason there's that static. So, I mean, I think we all could name a person in our lives, good person, but when I'm with them.
Maybe not good. You know, we don't need to be that nice about it, right? Mm-hmm.
That's my view. Where the healthy boundaries come in.
Oh, yeah.
And where are you giving too much of yourself? To where you might be taken advantage of or not having self-respect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, so we'll talk about love of enemies next time, but this is not, interestingly, this is not about love of enemies here. I don't think they're talking about love of enemies here. In fact, they don't want to. If you read any Jewish thinker on this, they think Jesus is crazy. Like that's just way too much. It's a destructive thing. It's self-destructive, and it's also destructive of healthy relationships, because you should have boundaries. You shouldn't love your neighbor. You shouldn't love your enemy the way you love somebody who's not your enemy. This is not right. So that would be, we'll get to that particular issue next time. The other thing though is this isn't about, about boundaries is a really good point. So it doesn't mean you should just be hanging out with people who hate you, right? That's not going to happen, right? So they're realistic. It's realistic. they think Jesus is being outrageously idealistic and almost destructively idealistic. So it's really interesting at that point. But they also think that saying of Jesus in Matthew has done tremendous harm to the reputation of the Jewish community in a Christian world. Because Christians run around thinking we teach love the enemy and you teach hate the enemy, and that's not true. So it's something in the middle. But to the question about the boundaries, that's I think why these examples are so good, because they're very concrete. They don't mean have your enemy over to your house, have dinner, and all that stuff. It just means if you see your enemy's donkey going astray, bring it back. Right? Doesn't mean then you'll be best friends. It could, because the one who is a hero turns an enemy into a friend. But it doesn't mean that's that oftentimes the person's still going to hate you and still be your enemy. But you help them, you feed them, you give them water when they need it, etc. But then it doesn't say, and then hang out together and try to get them to think the way you do, because that we tend to do that. That's in our language, that's enmeshment, right? We don't want to get enmeshed. Yeah, Sylvia.
Peter is on my question, what's the law?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What do they mean by love?
Well, they're not talking about loving the enemy here.
What is love? Or is love?
Oh, you mean in terms of love your neighbor? It's about doing good. It's just that simple. It's action. It's action. It is act. No, absolutely. Yeah. So it's action, but it's not love. But they would take love is more than action, right? Even in the Jewish tradition, you shall love the Lord your God. But to love the Lord your God mainly means obeying God's commandments, right? And so, yeah, it's a really good question. And the book of the Epistle of John says the same thing. If you say you love God and you see your neighbor hungry and don't do anything to help, then you don't love God. You're a liar. You don't love God. So love and action are very closely related. But it would be there's a motivating thing going on here, which you're right to point out, that bearing a grudge is a motivational thing. It's not an action. Seeking vengeance is a motivational thing. It's not an action. So they're after the things that motivate you to act vengefully, right? And bearing a grudge is the way that happens. So that's a destructive thing. But it's a really good question. What would it mean to love your neighbor? Is that affective or is it behavioral or is it both? I would say it's both. And it's mainly manifested in the way you do good for others. So, because all these things we see described here are feeding, giving drink, helping them with their animals, etc. And so it's very concrete, which I think is really marvelous, actually. So it's not a grandiose scheme. It's just the way we concretely interact with each other. But the thing they're really after, and you see this with both Rashi and Maimonides, is that internal thing going on about you wronged me and I'll never forget it, right? And you wronged me and I'm going to dream about how to get vengeance on you. You see this, the last examples I have, which we don't have time to get at, right out of the gate in Genesis, we have two examples of why this is so dangerous. Esau realizes Jacob has stolen his blessing, which he did with his mother's help, right? And he hates him. And what is he going to do? Kill him, right? And Joseph's brothers see how much their father loves Joseph. And they envy him and they hate him and they want to kill him. And they try to kill him and they finally sell him into slavery, right? So allowing hatred to brew in your heart leads to murder or leads to enslaving your own brother to the Egyptians. I mean, it's Exodus in reverse, basically. So those are, and then David and Saul, which I knew we wouldn't be able to get to. Saul is pursuing David because he's envious of him and he's become his enemy. And David has a chance to kill him and doesn't. And Saul is astonished that he doesn't kill him when he had a chance to. And so those are all examples of fighting the evil impulse, if you will, and also what giving into that evil impulse can lead to. Leads very quickly. Envy leads to hatred, leads to wanting to kill. But also nursing our grudges leads to hatred, leading to wanting to kill, or just mess everything up. So anyway, those are good questions, though. So really good. We'll be looking at this all of this period is what does it mean to love, especially what does it mean to love your enemy? We'll get to that next week. But this isn't about loving your enemy, but it's certainly not about hating your enemy. Right, and that's what I mainly wanted us to see. So anyway, thank you so much for being here, and we'll pick up, we'll get to Jesus next week. So, thank you.
Wonderful.